All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Comp Check episode 2, and we are going to get right into the games. VCT Americas has started. We have 4 regions going simultaneously now, so there's a lot to talk about. I don't want to waste any time. At the end, I will probably touch on the 2027 changes just a little bit. We're going to take a look at the meta. We're going to take a look at all the games, sort of rank the teams. And before we do that, I just want to quickly kind of like update everybody on how the power rankings in my brain have changed. This is where we were at the start of stage 1. Obviously, underrated some teams, overrated some others. This is where we were after the first week of games. Americas hadn't played. And now we are moving on to week number 2 for everybody. Week number 1 for Americas. Let's hop into the games. Sentinels versus Crew was our appetizer, I guess. And this one, for me, was going to be heavily Crew favored. I know that people are probably a little bit down on Crew just because they didn't play at all in the first in kickoff. And so nobody really knew exactly what we were going to get. We'd seen some kind of down years for Sodak and Les over in Europe. But I was very confident coming into this game in particular. You know, Sentinels playing with the stand-in, new coach, new team. They're going to have a very, very rough stage. It is what it is. I would not judge them too much off of this game, but I do think they're going to be quite weak, at least, you know, for probably the majority of this first stage. Meanwhile, Crew, I mean, this team is very exciting to me. They have an unbelievable amount of firepower. Like, I'm talking maybe top 5, top 3 in the world level of firepower. MW Zera has always been one of the best aimers in Brazil. You have him on a support role. You have Sodak playing smokes, Les, you know, picking up Viper, which he's just always played. You have Dante Deus, one of the best neons in the Americas, picking up the neon. And then Silence has been sort of like a flex sentinel pseudo duelist for a long time. So they can shoot with anybody. And their calling looked good as well, which is something that you would kind of expect from Sodak. You know, I think everybody just needs to delete the European adventure from their brain and just remember that Sodak was hailed as, you know, potentially the best IGL in the world for several years. So I expect them to have a very, very good stage, and they're one of my picks to potentially make it to Masters of London. Obviously, this is going to be kind of like a little bit of a warm-up game for them. John Cutie continues to have a very good season, but he's kind of backpacking everybody for the most part. And this team for Sentinels, they're just going to struggle, and it's just kind of unfortunate for their fans. Moving on to the next one, this was a huge banger. G2 versus MIBR, and honestly, this was a bit more one-sided than I expected. MIBR takes Lotus 13-8. Zekken looks unbelievable, and to be honest, I think it's kind of unfair that you can have Zekken and Ospas on the same team. Obviously, Verno has been great. Mizzino seems to be in like the perfect place meta-wise. You know, if Harbor's good, Mizzino's probably the best Harbor. He can flex to all sorts of different things. And one thing that I really liked about this matchup, actually, is that both teams are playing the Vice. Both teams are playing the Vice on both maps. So people are adapting to the fact that Neon is consistently being played by everybody. And I think you're going to see Neon numbers probably shrink against the teams that focus on the Vices, the Deadlocks, the Chambers, if anybody plays Sage, that type of thing. Now, one thing that I did want to kind of just show for fun, I've been building this app to scout players, and so I wanted to just quickly show a little comparison of Zekken and Ospas. This is across a bunch of different statistics. This is like their overall rating at the top. They're basically the same. They have very similar ratings across the board. Super, super close in terms of their win rate, their damage. Their Ospas dies less. Zekken dies a little bit more. Zekken gets a few more first bloods. Ospas gets a little bit less. And they kind of complement each other very, very well in terms of like you've got the damage output, you've got the first blood, Zekken a little bit more as the entry, Ospas is sort of like the trader. Then you have Ospas survives more, Zekken, you know, sells his life for the team. So I think they're actually in a really, really good spot as far as like how their comps are going to be structured if they do continue to lean into this Neon plus Ospas. It's a little bit weird that Ospas is playing the Rays. Although I don't mind it on Lotus and Split. I think he probably will be on the Waylay on some of these other maps if they do run this double duelist on every map. And even if they don't, I think that this team has a huge amount of potential. Obviously, that was the same coming into kickoff, and they somewhat realized it, but obviously kind of faltered at the last step. I think that this is a team that I have a lot of faith in to be very good this stage. They're my number one team, I think, at this point in Americas. And as long as Tex and Mizzino can stay consistent, I think this team probably should cruise to at least top two in their group, if not just the number one seed. On the other side of things, G2, I mean, they didn't get blown out on map two. At least they had a lot of chances to win this, and honestly, this probably should have gone to 3 maps. Um, some really uncharacteristically bad decisions from Leaf, I think, kind of cost them split, and that's something that you usually don't see from him. I think that one thing that is potentially going to hamper this team a bit is just that their role setup is a little bit weird, especially if they go to solo duelists on a lot of maps. Because, in my opinion, I think Jogamo is great as an entry, but he needs a second layer to kind of support him or take advantage of the space that he makes. I don't think he's ever been a really great hard carry duelist. He's not like an Ospas. He's not like somebody that he's not like a Kong Kong. He's not somebody that's going to take over the game by himself all the time. And so he needs that second person to be fragging with him, or potentially trading him out and using him as bait. And I think in some iterations of G2, that's been Valen, honestly. And when they brought in Baby Bay, I think that was kind of supposed to be Baby Bay, and it worked pretty well for them at kickoff and in the off season. But if Baby Bay is playing full-time Sentinel, I think this team might have some problems with just like their ability to capitalize on attack specifically. So that's something to keep an eye on. I do think that this team will be fine. I think they will certainly make playoffs, and they could very easily go to London. I'm not overreacting from this game, but I was a little bit surprised to see some really bad decisions from some of their smartest players, and I do think that they're fully leaning into solo duelist is not going to do them any favors, especially considering they brought in a player to be more aggressive when they made the move to get Baby Bay over Jonapi. And so I think that we'll have to kind of just see how the map pool develops for them. We'll get to the predictions after this. So 100 Thieves, Evil Geniuses, for me, this was a pretty easy 100 Thieves win. And it turned out to be that way. I just think that 100 Thieves has a very good team, very good coaching staff. They're very prepped. And honestly, what I saw from them with putting Asuna on the main dive on Neon makes a huge amount of sense. I do think that Timotino probably needs a little bit of help. Like he shouldered a lot of the weight during kickoff on that solo waylay all the time. And I think he's really going to benefit from having, Cryocells and Asuna also kind of pick up some of the fragging mantle and some of the entry duties. And I think that him being able to maybe trade off of Asuna sometimes is going to really help him. Cryocells looks more and more comfortable on the Sentinel role, which is great to see. And I think that overall this team is set up for a pretty good split. It's hard to say based off of one game against EG how good they're going to be, but I do think that they will make playoffs. And I do think that they have, decent top 4, top 3 potential, kind of depending on how like the meta shakes out and what their reads are and stuff like that. EG, on the other hand, is kind of a mess. I would say that Dijizin should really be leaning into the op, and he did. And when he does get the op, he looks good. But it felt like their macro was quite poor on, especially on Haven, but also on Breeze. I really did not like how they played either of these maps, which is kind of surprising, just because I feel like this team is one that maybe does quite well with time off and prep to kind of hammer out their ideas. So I was definitely pretty disappointed on how they played. They just kind of have some inconsistent players, I think, as well. And player for player, they did not stack up very well against 100 Thieves. And they kind of just got picked apart. I don't think, it's like the end of the line for EG, but I definitely think they're probably going to be, fighting for maybe that last slot into the playoffs. And certainly are one of the weaker teams in VCT Americas at the moment. Who do we have next? We have Envy versus Loud. Now, this was definitely an interesting one. Um, you know, Envy is completely changing who they are as a team. They went from being, this streamer team, the ascendant team, and I was kind of expecting them to hold on to that identity in their first year in VCT, but they have just blown up the team. I think I heard some rumors that Rossi is now calling for this team, so Poppin is not even IGLing. I don't know if that's true or not. Um, but they're just a completely different team. They obviously picked up Demon One, which and Kesnet and Rossi. All these guys are talented players that can shoot, which I think is it's good as far as like talent acquisition. But I don't really think that this team has an identity at the moment. And that's definitely going to be something that probably hinders their ability to win games. They're playing against a Loud team that has just been on the struggle bus for a year. It has had a huge amount of problems this year. They're playing with a coach, and they still lose this game, even though they win the first map. Demon One obviously can shoot. He looks good when he's shooting. Kesnet was looking super aggressive and strong on Lotus, but he kind of petered off a little bit over the course of the series. And then for me, I think the biggest thing is just this team is not playing Yoru anymore. They have the guy who only plays Yoru. And instead of making the game simple for him, they have him playing Omen, Vito, and Harbor. So he's actually playing. The craziest thing is they probably have their least flexible players playing the most agents. Demon One playing Vito, Astra, ISO. He's historically been like a 2-agent player. And then they have literally the least flexible player in VCT history. And they're asking him to play 3 completely different agents. To me, I think that's a bit of a mistake. I would probably just be trying to put Eggster on like 1 agent on every single map. If that's going to be Omen, cool. Make him play Omen on every map. Maybe Astra on Pearl, just because I think that map's pretty hard to play a solo Omen on. But asking him to do so much when he has only played 1 agent ever in his pro career is insane to me. And I think that this team is really going to struggle. And Eggster's going to get a lot of hate. But realistically, I just don't think they're setting him up to have any success, which I think is a problem. On the other side of things, Loud, I mean, the game was messy. It's kind of to be expected. They're playing with a coach, as I said, but they have some really, really good players. Darker has looked incredible, and everybody knows that Luke Shaw is good. There were some rumors coming into like the off season between kickoff and stage 1 that he was playing a bunch of duelists, and I was like, no, please don't put this guy on duelist just because he has good aim. He's been one of the most impressive lurk players and anchor players I've watched in the Americas region over the last year. And so I'm really happy to see him continue to play the Viper, continue to play the Chamber. His lurk timings are just insane. Like he fully destroyed Envy on Pearl. Almost single-handedly, Luke Shaw won them this map. Him and Darker together were doing insane work. So Loud gets their first win in, I think, a year, which is, hats off to them considering all the problems that they've had this year. Will they be a good team? They're probably still going to be towards the bottom, but they certainly have a lot of potential, and they have pieces that they can build around, certainly for this stage and potentially stage 2. We'll have to see. We'll have to see and evaluate. This Envy team also has a lot of good pieces, but I just don't see any coherence on this team, and I'm a little bit worried about the mental of these guys, considering that they have a lot of players who expect to be really, really good. Like, they all are super mechanically talented and kind of like gain confidence from their ability to just like fight people. And if they're losing games and they're losing to teams that they might think are weaker than them, I think it might be a little problematic for the mentality going forward. Let's go on to the final slate of games for this week 1, which is Cloud9 and Lev. This one was a slaughter. Cloud9 basically just didn't show up for the match. They were getting completely outskilled, especially on map number 1. I think they basically just lost like every kind of 50-50 duel. They were losing situations where they had advantage, and Neon or somebody would just flick around and insta kill them when they had the first shot. And I think that it's kind of a tale of two teams where I was fairly high on Cloud9 coming into this because I thought they were making some good progress towards the end of kickoff. And obviously they had to deal with Oxy's unfortunate family situation. And so I thought that, with maybe some of the chaos behind them, coming together as a team with a bit of time to prepare, they would probably, figure it out and come into this season strong. But they looked really, really bad. I thought their macro was quite poor, and their overall game plan was really rough on both of the maps. I do not think that this comp on Haven suits them at all. I'm pretty surprised that they're playing this. I think a lot of these agent and player combinations on the roles look super weird to me. Meanwhile, Lev is leaning into who they are. I think the biggest like hit on Lev in kickoff was that they have a bunch of super young, very aggressive, very talented players, but they were being asked to play like they were geriatric CS players and having to sit back and wait and do nothing and not make plays and not take advantages and not take timings. And that is kind of what we saw in week one of stage one now, is that Neon was off the leash. Sato now has a sort of like a bash buddy. Spike is going in. He was incredible on Neon during the Ascension run that his team had. Who was he on? Was he on All Nights? Is that? No, he was on 2G. Yeah, he was insane on 2G and playing the Neon. It was like him and Dante Deus were like the two Neon insane players in Ascension that year. So it's great to see him playing the Neon. Let Sato be the second one in. Sato obviously had a much better game as a result of that sort of switch. And then Neon he is nasty. Like he was promised to be very good, and he is very good. He's super fast, incredibly accurate, really, really strong with the op. I think Lev is going to be good. And probably in my power ranking this week, I might have underrated them a little bit, but I didn't want to react too much because I thought Cloud9 played so poorly. That's a little bit hard to get a good gauge on just how good Lev is going to be. I think that Cloud9 will probably bounce back a little bit, but this was a pretty worrying showing for them just because, this is a team that should be, like, their chemistry should be good. Like, all these players have played together for a while now, so they shouldn't have looked so, like, flat. But maybe it's just a week one thing. They didn't wake up for the game in the right way. We'll have to see. That being said, Lev on the trajectory upwards. Cloud9 certainly falling pretty precipitously. Furia Energy. Now, this one was an exciting game for me. Two teams who went to Master Santiago. Furia definitely showed some like big stage jitters there. Some of their form from kickoff fell off quite a bit. Energy rose to the occasion, as you might expect from a reigning world champion. And so seeing them match up in Americas again, week one, is very exciting. And honestly, Furia kind of battered them on map number one. This, to me, looked a lot like just Furia. They came in ready. Energy didn't really switch anything on their Pearl. They were confident in their Pearl, and it seemed like Furia was ready for this. The double drone on Pearl is something that Energy's been running. And kind of some uncharacteristically bad macro decisions, I feel like, from Energy on this map. They didn't seem like they were nearly as well drilled as you might expect them to be. I think some of the pivots that they made during the round were also kind of bad. And I think one of the biggest things is that they didn't do a good job on either map figuring out where the Sentinels were. And so that allowed Furia to just like keep their wall up for the entire round on split, or just keep lines with their Killjoy utility or Alarm Bot for so long, which is really weird because when you have two drones, especially like a Teo drone, it's really good for just going out, finding the Vice Wall or finding the Killjoy setup, and then that gives you a pretty good picture of what the actual defensive setup is. But they weren't doing that, and so they were letting the rounds go really late, and then just running into stacked sites or running into a sentinel setup with support utility. Alum had an unbelievable game. He was looking hungry and angry, and he played like it. Looked really nice in the neon. And Koala Noob, I was pretty worried about the Phoenix, because I was like, this guy's op is a huge win condition for them, and they're kind of taking it out of his hands by playing the Phoenix. But he attack opted with the Phoenix, which is kind of weird. I don't know if it's optimal, but it worked. They had some unique ideas. They definitely caught Energy off guard with a lot of their tempo shifts, which was cool to see. And I think the Energy just looked a little bit flat-footed on both maps. That being said, the champion mentality really came back, and Mata in particular had some incredible rounds towards the end of Split, almost bringing it back. I think if this goes to Fracture, Energy probably wins this series just purely off of the momentum. But it's really hard to come back from a 9-3, a 10-3, and so they didn't really give themselves that much wiggle room. I do like that they're playing, some just different ideas. Like, they're still just doing what they think is good for them. Big fan of that. And kind of at the same time, Furia is doing a similar thing, right? Koala Noob switching over to the Omen. They're playing the Vice. Artson calling looked good. Nerve calling looked good. I think this team is very high IQ in terms of their, like, a lot of their players have very good ideas and good reads. And so it was cool to see them kind of beat a team that is also known for being a pretty high IQ team in how they play the game. I think Energy will be fine, but Furia, I definitely underrated. I think I looked at their Santiago and I was like, oh, this team is maybe going to fall off a bit, just because I thought a lot of their players kind of like faded under the pressure. And maybe they kind of had a bit of a honeymoon period coming in, but they look great. They look great. So Furia is definitely one of the top teams in America. And I think Energy is too. We'll just kind of have to see how the stage develops. But that was week 1 of Americas. Quickly, I'm going to do the pick'ems here. We've got Cloud9 versus Envy. I mean, Demon 1 versus Cloud9. This one is tough. Like, I don't really feel great about either of these teams. I could definitely see Cloud9 like anteing Eggster specifically and just targeting him. I could see Envy just out shooting Cloud9. Obviously, there's like the Rossi was on. There's going to be a lot of weird, potentially bad blood and weird relationship stuff going on in this series. I think I'm probably going to go with the Cloud9 bounce back, but I don't really feel very confident about this at all. Furia EG, I feel pretty good about Furia going into this one. EG looked fine, but I think Furia just looks like a better team overall. And the only teams that would maybe scare me for Furia are, some of like the super high firepower teams like an MIBR or Crew, maybe even Lev potentially, but I think they should handle EG pretty easily. G2 versus Lev, this one will be very interesting. Part of me wants to just pick Lev, but I think G2 will bounce back. I don't want to be too down on them just because they lost to the team that I think is maybe the best in Americas right now. And so I'm going to go with G2. I think this one could be close. I think that G2 will do a much better job than Cloud9 did at handling how Lev plays. So we'll back them for this. MIBR versus Loud. I mean, this one is certainly more interesting than it would have been otherwise, but I got to go with MIBR. Ospas is Brazil's dad, and I expect that to continue, but it could be pretty interesting. Energy versus Crew. This one is very interesting. I kind of want to just go with Crew on the rise. I think that Energy... Yeah, this one is really tough. I think I'm just going to go with Crew on the rise here, because I think that their firepower may overpower Energy a little bit. I definitely think Energy will come in with more energy, like not quite as flat as they did against Furia, but that might actually play into Crew's style. And I think that this meta is great for Sadok. It's great for a lot of the players on this team. So I'm going to back Crew. I think Crew's on the rise. Could be a banger. I also would not be surprised to see Energy win this. And 100 Thieves should very easily take care of Sentinels. Again, is Victor playing? Is Jerwin going to play? I have no idea. I don't think it really matters. I think this team is going to need some time, and 100 Thieves looks quite good. So those are my pick'ems for America's week number 2. And let's go ahead and move on to EMEA. Bring up my notes real quick. All right. So week number 2 definitely had some interesting movement here. Let's start by talking about Pacific and Giants. Two teams that are probably going to end up towards the bottom of the group either way. One of them might sneak into playoffs because of this game. I think that, Pacific, they're just very hit or miss. I think 7 looks great a lot of the time, but, the rest of the team doesn't show up on map number 1. On Pearl, it's sort of a different story. 7's at the bottom. The CNED double duelist with 7 looks a little bit weird. I think that at the same time, Giants didn't really make a great case for themselves either. I don't feel like Aura is still very hit or miss. I just feel like neither one of these teams feels comfortable in the meta based off of their players. I think that West Side on the Duelist, it's maybe the best solution that they have, but also it feels really weird, and it doesn't really seem like that is who this team is supposed to be. They're definitely more of like a methodical team, and trying to just like send it on split feels super weird to me. They did win the game, I think, purely just because the player quality on this team is a little bit higher. Cloud had a pretty solid game, but this entire series was a bit of a mess. I didn't gain. Yeah, it's so weird seeing Flickless on Cypher, Westside on Phoenix. I really don't have a ton of hope for either of these teams going forward, so I don't want to spend too much time on this matchup. We'll have to see. Again, I think one might sneak into playoffs, but it's not looking great for either team. Moving on to BBL versus Eternal Fire. This one is actually very interesting. So I've had some pretty strong beliefs about BBL, which is that I think that they were pretty overrated coming into this year. Obviously, they did go to Santiago, but I think there's sort of a pattern, and I can also reference like Varel in this regard. I've seen a lot of people, analysts, podcasters, other people like on broadcast. Everybody's always glazing BBL for just being like this insanely, oh, they're so aggressive, they're so insane, blah blah blah. What I see when I watch BBL play is I see a team that has a lot of shooters that have very, very poor macro, and they just kind of like do stuff. And I think in kickoff, they were able to catch a lot of teams off guard by how they played, because nobody else in EMEA really plays like that. But the same kind of thing was happening with Varel. Like they won Ascension, and everybody was like, oh, Varel could do some damage in the league. And I look at Varel and I'm like, this team is not very good. And what I mean by that is like they have a lot of talented shooters on their team, but they don't have very many good ideas to back that up, because their style only works against teams that are worse than them. And so they don't get punished, and they don't really learn lessons that they should be learning to get better, because they just shoot their way out of all of their problems. And I think that is something that I'm seeing a lot out of BBL now, which is that they are still trying to just kind of like wander around, take random fights, play both sides of the map at the same time, not really respect strong side, weak side on defense. I think they're, trying to force Larocque into their entry duelist on this Neon constantly. And I think their macro on defense is just really bad. And it was completely band-aided by the fact that they could just teleport their Yoru from one side to the other. And Lover's Rock has no game if he's not playing Jet or Yoru, unfortunately. If you just kind of look at him as a player in general, like all of his games are Jet and Yoru. And if you look at Raze and any other duelist, he's quite low on the list. He basically only can play Jet and Yoru, and I think this team is really going to miss that Yoru, which kind of leads me to like another random tangent, which is that some of these teams I think should probably still be playing the Yoru, because forcing stuff that they're just not good at, it can't be worse. I mean, playing a nerfed Yoru can't be worse than trying to play something that you're not good at. especially when you only have like 3 games to make a case for yourself in playoffs. This is something that I learned last year, which is that sometimes you really just have to lean into comfort. And if you make that decision too late, oftentimes your season is just completely screwed. So I think that BBL has some really serious issues to fix on their team. I think that this split for them is probably a wash, and they really need to focus on like learning the lessons that they should have learned but didn't because they were too skilled to learn them up until this point. Hopefully that makes sense. It's just kind of one of those things where like I watch this team play and I don't like how they're playing the game. I didn't like it at kickoff. I didn't like it. At Ascension it kind of works just because like they're so much more talented than the teams that they're playing, that it looks kind of cool. And I think that is sort of the mirage that has allowed them to be sort of like hyped up as a team, which is that they look sick when they're shooting everybody, but against the teams that are good, that style of play is just not going to work. It's just not going to work very well. That's enough about BBL. Eternal Fire looks nuts. Obviously, this was Ulf. This was the other Ascension team, and these guys look really sick. Having Echo back in has been an incredible boost. He looks just truly tier 1 talent. And honestly, Fabian has looked incredible. This whole team has looked really good. It's been nice to see Izzy come in. He was a very, very high firepower player on a lot of sort of like middling Turkish teams for a while in tier 2. And so it's nice to see him with a team that is sort of like at the same skill level or even above his. I think that, if this team still had SOP, they would probably be even a little bit better just because they would have had that, the chemistry of playing together for so long. And SOP might be slightly better than Izzy, but either way, this team definitely can do damage. I'm excited to see how they develop, and I think that they're leaning into the stuff that makes them good, and doing a lot of aggressive stuff to set up Echo's lurks, and then they have just the firepower to back up this type of play. So very excited to watch how Eternal Fire develops. And again, it's 2 teams going in completely opposite directions, in my opinion. Moving on to Fnatic versus Vitality. This was always going to be a banger game. So much history between these teams. And Fnatic came out and got rolled early. But they're Fnatic, and they're used to starting slow. And they started much less slow than they did against Eternal Fire. So it was nice to see them course correct earlier than they did against Eternal Fire. And honestly, I mean, they're just so good. Like, Fnatic is just so good. Their ideas are good, their structure is good, their players are good, their calling is good, and I have just been impressed by them this season, even though their results might not have been like the best. But I think that they are pretty clearly the best team in Europe right now. Vitality, they also are very good. They have very good players. I think Sayonara is more likely to be a boom than a bust as far as a talent prospect goes. I think for me, the most worrying thing for Vitality is just the BBL core of this team. Durka is always going to give you value. Chronicle obviously is Chronicle, and Sayonara looks like he is going to sort of recognize the prospect that he has been heralded. But Profik has looked quite poor. And honestly, especially when you take him off of like the comfort stuff of like the Omen, the Brimstone, maybe a little bit of Astra, like this Harbor was terrible. It was really bad. And even just sort of some of his decision making, even on the Omen, has looked kind of rough. And similarly, I would say the same thing goes for Yampy. I feel like they got totally outcalled in this series. I feel like a lot of Yampy's decision makings were kind of desperate and not very good. And I think that if you have Durka dropping 27 kills with 314 ACS, you should never be losing this map. But at the same time, I didn't love the Sayonara on Raze. I think that probably, I don't know, my take on Sayonara has always been that he's incredibly good at shooting and he's way too aggressive. And I think that when you give him a duelist, he's going to kind of lean into the bad decision making of playing too aggressive. But when you put him on a character that is supposed to be a little bit more passive, I think it kind of unlocks him as a player, because you get the shooting the same, but he also doesn't take quite as many chances. And when he does take those chances, it's a lot more unexpected for it to come from a Sova, so it gets more value. Whereas if you put him on a raise and you just kind of say like go in with Durka, he's just going to overheat. And I think we kind of saw that on Split. I think that, you know, this team will still be good. I still have them like top 3 in Europe, but I do think that they certainly have some cracks that teams could exploit. And I think they need to kind of shore up some of their general identity, because I don't feel like they have like a super strong identity yet. You know, they're kind of like halfway between Durka carry and halfway between double duelist. Yampy is still playing a little bit too much like a duelist on the IGL role. Chronicle, he's great, but you can't win when you just have great players. You have to have like a good team, especially when you want to try and like make it international and go on a run in that regard. So yeah, that's my review of those two teams. Liquid versus Heretics. Heretics made a roster move, kicking comeback. Yeah, let's talk about that first. So the interview with Neil Zinio, the coach, I mean, when this first happened, there was obviously a lot of blowback of being like, wow, I can't believe they only gave him one game. Like, what were you guys working on? Blah, 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 blah. And then the interview with Neil Zinio comes out, and he says, well, he kind of said that he didn't want to play for the team anymore after the stage. I think at that point, it's like you have to kick him basically immediately. And I had a fairly similar experience last year where I had a player who just kind of expressed like, I don't know if I am gonna like work, and at that point you kind of just have to make a change. So because like the thing is, to make a good team, everybody has to be in like 100%. And if you can't get your team to be 100% in, then it's very, very hard to like develop chemistry and trust each other and that type of thing. And so if a player is sort of like 1 foot out, you have to just bench them. So I kind of commend them for taking the chance and like potentially tanking their split and trying to go all in for stage number 2. They bring in Kashmeris, who looked okay, but obviously this is like 3 days of practice. It's not going to go well. I don't think that Heretics is going to be terrible, but they probably will struggle pretty heavily this stage. On the other side of things, Liquid looks like they are ramping up. Like this team looks like they are comfortable in who they are. They are leaning into stuff that is good for them. They're playing a lot of this double duelist with Camo and Miniboo on the Neon. Obviously, he's probably been the best Neon in Europe for a while, and so playing him on Neon a bunch. Obviously, letting Nats take over on the Viper or the Cypher. Purpo is a very aggressive initiator player just because he was a former duelist, so putting him on like the Sky and the Fade makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I like what I'm seeing out of Liquid. I think I don't want to rate them like too highly after beating a team that's playing with essentially a stand-in, but I think they looked quite good in like every aspect of the game. So I definitely have them like top 4 in Europe right now. I think they could definitely make yet another international and hopefully not go 1 and 2 and get eliminated there. Moving on to Foot versus Na'Vi. Now, again, I gotta hand it to these Turkish teams. They're just picking up a bunch of really strong shooters, throwing them together, playing kind of like simple but aggressive game plans, leaning into what they're good at, and it's working out quite well. Sociable again has an incredible. Obviously, he got kicked from Na'Vi, so this is kind of like a revenge game for him as well. You know, put in that little bit of extra effort, and everybody for Foot is shooting. Everybody's stepping up. They've got a lot of players sort of like doing their job. They play well together as a team. Their reads are good. I think that, I mean, maybe they're top 4 also. Like they looked really good in this series, and I think that Na'Vi also looked pretty good. They had a little bit of a come back to earth moment after winning some insane clutches to beat Heretics in week number 1. So I do think that their ceiling is still a little bit capped right now because they're playing with a sort of last minute substitute in Kalasha. But I will also say that he played much better than he did in week 1, as you might expect. They're clearly working with him and trying to integrate him a bit more. And although, did I recently just see something that Comeback is going to sub in for this team? I think I did actually. So maybe they won't be integrating him, but certainly I think he stepped up and had some big rounds between week 1 and week 2. Obviously, this team is all about Hero and Ruxic. Cloric's calling looks pretty good. Filu is a little bit of a question mark for me still. I think he's kind of inconsistent. He's pretty hit or miss, especially when you take him off the chamber. And so Navi still has some work, but that's kind of to be expected, right? Because they're playing with just like stand-in players. So we're not going to see full strength Navi this stage probably, and that's a little unfortunate because I think their potential is quite high. So it is what it is. They might still make playoffs. Maybe they'll go on a little bit of a run, but I think maybe stage 2 is where I'm really going to look for Navi to be like a potentially international qualifying team. Right now, I think it's all about Foot. I think Foot with Sop and Zeus is like one of the better 1-2 punches in Europe. And then they have so much firepower coming out of their Sentinel and even their IGL smokes roll that this team really can shoot with everybody. They're kind of like Eternal Fire in that regard, where it's just like, you don't want to be dueling this team. Like if you're just dueling them and you don't have a good game plan behind it, they will probably run you over. And so that is always going to be fun to watch. And as long as they continue to develop and just kind of like stick to what they're good at and develop a little bit of stuff around that and not just get too carried away with just like running it down all the time, I think they will actually be a pretty dangerous team for anybody to play. Let's move on to Gentlemates versus Karmine Corps. We had 2 big French orgs playing each other. And we had yet another game where Karmine Corps looked kind of shaky. For me, I think as tough as it is to single out players, I really just think that this team cannot win as long as they have Levin as their main duelist, because he just can't play anything other than Jet. It's been proven over and over. Like he can't play anything other than Jet. And even his Jet is good, but Jet is a pretty average agent. You don't want to be leaning on Jet in the map pool right now. And I think that it's just going to be a bit of a liability. This team, they have some good talent. Like Dacia continues to be a bright spot for them. Sugetsu had a nice bounce back after having a terrible week 1. Narrate continues to look solid. Aves, very inconsistent, but he has some talent. I just think that I don't know, this team, I feel like they're a little bit off in terms of what they're playing meta read wise. I feel like they're a little bit off in terms of their roles. Maybe not the roles, but they're just, I don't know. There's just like they just have some problems when I watch them play, and I think that most teams are going to exploit them. Mates, I think, is also a team that is having some problems. Obviously, they were carried heavily by the Yoru. Martine's Yoru was incredible, and they have sort of decided to lean into having him play the Veto. He's kind of become a little bit of their Sentinel player in some regard, which I think is okay, although Mini is definitely a great lurking Sentinel as well, so they're going to have a little bit of role conflict. We saw Mini play the Breach on Fracture, and it was fine. But I do think that this is a team that will probably be a little bit they'll have like a little bit of a ceiling as long as they're just sending Bippo in by himself and then trying to trade out. Because I think that when they don't lean into, the Martine op pressure, contacting with the operator, and they don't have sort of like a really solid 1-2 punch with the Neon, I think they just lack a little bit of firepower against some of the best teams. And they kind of have to win too many rounds with good positioning in their brain and excellent trades. And that was certainly good enough to beat Karmine Corps. But I think against a team like Fnatic or a Vitality, they're probably just going to get outshot. And, they're going to get picked too often. They're not going to have clean enough entries to actually win those rounds. So I think that this team is they're still a solid team. I think team-wise they're good, but I do think that they have some problems because of the meta shift, and also just because I think firepower-wise they're a little bit on the low end for qualifying for London. Okay. That is the end of week 2 for EMEA. So let's go ahead and move on to the pick'em. And We're at a nice little 50-50 so far in Europe. Giants versus BBL. Bro, I have no idea. I think I'm just going to go Giants. I'm very low on BBL right now. So I'm going to go for Giants. I feel like Giants, maybe slow style, should be able to pick apart BBL. Maybe BBL will do something drastic and they'll play some Yoru. Maybe they will totally change things up. I kind of thought that they would just immediately go pick up comeback after he got dropped by Navi because he played with them before. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not high on either of these teams, but we'll just go Giants here. Navi Gentlemates. Ooh, this one will be interesting. I mean, I kind of want to go Navi because I feel like the player quality is just good enough on Navi to, even though they'll be playing with a stand-in, I think they might be able to outshoot Gentlemates. So I think I'm going to go Navi here, but this one is also pretty 50-50 for me. It kind of depends on like the map pool, Starkzo's calling, how much Navi can get done in a week with potentially a new stand-in. If that report is real. If it's Kalasha again, I think I would feel even more comfortable just picking Navi because they'll have had 3 weeks to work on stuff. Vitality versus Eternal Fire is a fun one. It's like kind of tempting to go for EF here, but I think this is where sort of like that, they're a young team, they're doing a lot of crazy stuff, they're taking a lot of chances, and I think this is kind of like the level of team where it's just not quite gonna work. Um, Again, even though Vitality lost to Fnatic, I'm still pretty high on this team. And I do think that if a team is kind of just challenging them with mechanics, Durka, Chronicle, uh, these players are not going to be losing enough fights to them where Eternal Fire is going to be able to run them over. Karmine Core versus Heretics is really interesting because honestly, this one could go either way for me at this point. I'm pretty low on Karmine Core, but I'm also not super high on Heretics. I think that, oh man, this is tough. I keep picking Heretic. No, I picked Liquid over Heretics. That was pretty easy. I think I just have to go Heretics. Oh man, I don't know. The fact that I'm hesitating this much is not a good sign for Heretics, but I think they will be better than Karmine Core. I think that's fairly safe. Liquid versus Foot. This one is actually very interesting. Um, I think I'm probably still gonna go Liquid here because I just like what they're doing. But I think this is like, maybe like the third or fourth best team against like the fourth or fifth best team in Europe right now. And so I think that Liquid has a slight edge. They obviously just have a little bit of a Nats advantage in my opinion. I think he's just been really, really good in terms of like reading teams. But Foot could definitely steamroll them a little bit. They have enough firepower. This will be a big, I think, telling game of how good Sociable's IGLing can be, and sort of like what the Foot prep is compared to like the Liquid prep. Because I would say that Liquid is going to be a great benchmark team for some of these teams that are trying to like punch for the upper echelon. Because de facto for me, I think Liquid is like number 3. And if any team wants to go to London, they need to beat Liquid, is sort of what I would put it as. Fnatic will beat Pacific, and that should be pretty easy. Cool. Let's move on to Pacific, and then we will speedrun China, and then we'll talk about the meta briefly. Okay. Pacific has some very interesting developments in week number 2. We had Detonation Focus Me versus T1. Honestly, this was a fairly close first map. This is one of DFM's best maps in Pearl. I thought that T1 played okay, and DFM played pretty well, but T1 just kind of like won the critical moments. So obviously it went to overtime, trade back and forth, but then T1 closed it out. It was a little worrying that T1 was not able to close it out. You can see that they were on match point for a while, and DFM wins 5 straight to bring it back. So that was a little bit concerning, as like a T1 believer, if you are one. But I think that this team is still quite high quality. Um, DFM, I think, is in a bit of a rough spot. I really don't like their roles right now. I feel like Yatsuka has a massive amount of value on the Lurk, and putting him on Astra while Kaide is playing the Killjoy doesn't make a ton of sense to me. Um, Moving on to Lotus. DFM has never been a good Lotus team. I think their comp is trash. I think they played very poorly. Uh, Munchkin has notoriously been good at Lotus, and this was just like a total everything diff, strat diff, comp diff, calling diff, firepower diff. Um, yeah, not too much to say about it. T1 is just clearly a better team than DFM, but it's still hard to kind of read exactly what the potential is for T1. I think DFM, unfortunately, is probably going to end up towards the bottom, if not at the bottom of their group. And so it's just like return to form for DFM back at the bottom of Pacific. Unlucky. Moving on to Nongshim against DRX. Okay, another just really, really tough turnaround for Nongshim. They win Santiago. They immediately start off against Paper X, lose a super close series, and they go into DRX, who looked like they might be a little weak coming into this year, just because they hadn't really solved that fifth spot. They're playing free on Neon, which seems very strange, but Yang has looked really good. So I don't know where they keep finding these kids. Was he on the academy team? He was. So they scouted him early. They've locked him away and they've developed him. I mean, for me, I think DRX looks like one of the maybe like 2-3 best teams in the league right now. I think this is their fifth for sure, and I think that they are going to be a very dangerous team for everybody to play. Nongshim still making some questionable comp choices in my opinion. I think the biggest thing for them right now is you can see Francis plays Breach on all 3 maps. I fucking hate this. I really do not like this. I think that they're really missing his op pressure. I think that him on the op on Yoru was a big win condition for them. I think that the contact opping on attack, obviously the outlaw, as well, was really, really important to how they played the game, because it kind of helped offset Danby's need to just go fast, because they could like tempo shift, right? Some rounds they're just sending it and the team is off balance, because on another round they might just be contact opping. And so that sort of ability to shift between those 2 tempos is something that was allowing them to have a lot of success. And so when they just go full in on just like, let's just send Danby in, they're kind of just back at the point where they were, I would say, like the first time that they ascended. And so in like 2025, where they were very aggressive, very explosive, but also they were kind of one-dimensional. And I feel like they're kind of one-dimensional right now, which is not a good place to be. Because everybody is used to just this fast tempo now, especially in Pacific, and you need to be able to mix things up. So I would really love to see them try and find a way to get the op back in Francis's hands, even if that means, totally changing their comps again. I feel like this is a team that is primed for playing Deadlock. I don't know why they're not playing Deadlock. Deadlock is good in the meta right now, and they have an incredibly good Deadlock theory and idea. They played a lot of Deadlock last year, and they were very good with it. I would love to see that come back. The bright spots for Nongshim is that X-Ross continues to be incredible. And they're still a very strong team. I think that, like, even though they are now 0-2 and potentially going to miss playoffs because of their group being very hard, I still would probably put them in like the top 5, maybe top 6 of Pacific. And so if they can just kind of like tweak a couple things comp-wise and find their new slightly different identity, I think they will still be a very good team. On the other side of things, I mean, look at this. Plus 11 total carry by the Chamber, the new kid on Lotus. Hyunmin probably still has top 3 aim in the world. I think that, allowing Mako to not have to call, I think it's still Bane calling. Yeah, just in general, I think this team is good. Like, the DRX has always had good reads. They've always had some good, unique stuff. I think they're finding their identity well. The freeing neon stuff is still a little bit weird to me. I don't really know how I feel about that. But he's never really found his place, I feel like, outside of the Tejo meta, and so maybe this is it. It'll be interesting to see how this team develops. But I'm pretty high on DRX, and Nongshim I'm fairly neutral on right now. Moving on to Secret versus Global. Well, this was the series that knocked us out last year, where we thought we could maybe go on a run in stage 2, but we lost the Secret. And this year, Global goes ahead, beats Secret, takes care of business, goes up to 2-0. Again, really good performance out of Crystal, which is super nice to see. He had a pretty rough kickoff, but he's looking comfortable on the fade and the deadlock. Yudutan just playing Raze a bunch. Autumn kind of filling in for whatever they need. Javi and Patman also just doing their job. Patman not having to carry quite as much as he was in kickoff, which is probably good. And this team, honestly, I think just looks really solid. I would say they're probably top 3, top 4 in the league right now. It's a little bit hard to rate them just because they've only played Gen G, who looked unbelievably bad in week 1. We'll get to them in a second. And then Team Secret, who most people rank quite low. So is GE really that good? We'll see. They now have to play against DRX, Nongshim, and PaperX to finish out their season. So they could end up 2-3. But they probably will make playoffs just based off of the start to their year. So good on them. Excited to see how they do against DRX. That'll be a really good litmus test. Team Secret, on the other hand, I mean, they've got some good players. Like Kelly S, former player of mine. He's obviously talented. Like, he can shoot well. I think he's doing a pretty good job for this team. Sylvan, also pretty talented. Does a pretty good job. Rimuru, I mean, unfortunate. He's like, they brought him up. He's playing Neon. He has a lot of weight on his shoulders. He looks inexperienced. He's dying randomly way too much. Over peaking a lot. This is just a team that, like, unfortunately, player quality wise, I don't think can stack up against a lot of the teams in Pacific. Berserk's is solid. Jesse Vash is decent, but he has way too many whiffs at critical moments as well. Secret, again, kind of like I said after week 1, I don't think this team is terrible, but I just don't think they're good enough to really do anything. And so they're unfortunately probably going to end up at the bottom of the league yet again. Okay, moving on to Varel versus RQ. And Varel comes out swinging. Actually, they come out getting dominated, but then they swing back. And they made this a very close series. I think this is probably a good game for Varel in terms of they get dominated early, they make a run back, and then they play a very, very close series that they could have, potentially pushed to 3 maps. Jemkin had an insane map for RQ, an insane series, actually. They're leaning into the Waylay for him, and Varel is just Varel. Like, they're playing double duelist with the Jet, with the Chamber. This is who they were in Ascension, and kind of like I was saying about BBL, this is just a team that just, like, wanders around and takes fights. And that's who they are. That's their play style. It's not going to do well at tier 1, and probably they will be one of the worst teams in the league. But on the right day, if everybody's hitting and they catch a team off guard, I think it could potentially get them some results. I thought it might against RQ, because RQ is a team that sometimes does falter to these, like, random, chaotic, aggressive teams. And so this was a series that I thought was a little bit of a trap for RQ, and it almost turned out to be. RQ, on the other hand, I think that they are kind of just who they've always been. Like, very reliant on Jemkin having big games, very reliant on Xfiro having his, like, big 3-4K clutch moments. If they can get a big value out of Monette, like 1 map per series, that's pretty good. Cushy will be clutch. Their calling and their structure is pretty, like, straightforward and pretty consistent. They don't make a ton of big mistakes, but they also don't make a ton of, like, big game winning plays either. I would say they kind of just, like, do the right thing a lot, and it's going to beat a lot of worse teams than them, and it's probably going to put them, kind of like middle of the pack to, like, upper echelon. Although, I mean, who knows? Like this, they could potentially do the same thing they did last year, which is all of a sudden they just play really well for a period of time and they end up at the top of their group. Um, that's always possible for this team. I just feel like they're never like the team that I'm like, yes, this team is going to go win an international, but they certainly could make one. Um, okay, let's move on to Full Sense versus Zeta. These are actually two of my most interesting teams to watch in Stage 1, I have to admit. Even though this was a very one-sided series, I think this is more to do with Full Sense being incredibly good than Zeta being bad. Because there were definitely quite a few moments where I feel like Zeta kind of like lost a big round, got a little bit outshot in situations where if they just hit a couple more bullets, they maybe win the round and the map becomes much closer. So I wouldn't trust this score line as much. But at the same time, Full Sense they look really nice. Primi is playing unbelievable. Everybody on this team can shoot. I feel like Cruz's individual form is also quite high, in addition to him just clearly being able to outcall most of the players or most of the teams that they're playing against. Now, I will say they started off against some pretty weak competition. So next week and like the subsequent weeks will be the interesting ones to watch for Full Sense. But for me, I would say they are potentially the best team. They certainly have potential to be one of the best teams in the league. And I think they're getting pretty close to realizing that. At the same time, I think Zeta, you know, I'm kind of in for this team, even though they're 0-2. I feel like they've played pretty well. They looked a little bit to me like a team that had been told, and I think they probably have been told by like Minnie and their coaching staff to be more proactive, because you can see them like every single time there's something on one side of the map, they're always pushing out. They're always looking for that aggressive space, and that's usually good. But sometimes they're going too far, and sometimes they're fighting too much. So it's like they've been told that they need to be proactive, so they're doing that, and now they just need to learn to like pull back at the right time. So I think that this is a team that has potential to grow. Will they ever be like a top tier team? I don't think so, but they definitely are solid, and I could see them, you know, if they keep this core and they continue to get better, I could see them making playoffs. I could see them making playoffs in Stage 2. Yeah, again, I thought they played relatively well, even though the results kind of speak otherwise. But yeah, Full Sense, they look really good. I'm excited to see them play against some better teams, because I think they will continue to dominate, but I could be wrong. Gen G Paper X. To finish out the week, we got a game that I think most people thought was like 95-5 in terms of Paper X's chance of winning. At least that's certainly how I felt after watching week 1 of Gen G play. But then Solo and HSK and Gen G pulled out the Uno reverse card, the trap card. Hey, guess what? Foxy9 is benched. Ash, he had some time to think about what he'd been doing. We brought him back in, and he played really well. He played really well on map number 1 and map number, mostly map number 1, honestly. I would say that he was like one of the main reasons that they were able to win map number 1, is Ash's play. Like his anchoring was really good on C site. He was hitting some really nice shots. He looked more comfortable on smokes than he had previously at kickoff. And I think another thing for me that was really nice to see, it was Texture just opping constantly and having a lot of value, and playing in a way that seemed a little bit free of knowing that a lot of the weight is on his shoulders, because they were able to send in Zinks to kind of like eat up space and like die for the team. And then Charon playing the Phoenix was very interesting. I mean, I still don't know how I feel about this, like Charon playing Sentinel and Phoenix and that type of thing. But from what I've heard, they really want Meteor to be on their team, and they don't have Meteor, so they're trying to create Meteor. And so they are creating Meteor by having Charon, who has, you know, Meteor levels or maybe even higher aim and aggression, and just kind of transitioning him into that role. And I think that, you know, Ash would never play like that. I think Foxy9 was probably not quite consistent enough to be that guy, and so they want Karen to be that guy, and maybe that is coming to fruition here. I know a lot of people are going to point at something on PaperX as like the big problem here, and I think there's some validity to that. First, I kind of want to focus on Jing. I think Jing is having like a season for the ages right now. He's been so good for this team. Like every single map, his consistency has been incredible for PaperX. Him and Devi have been very, very solid. They're kind of like the rock solid core of this team. Envy is kind of up and down, and something has been very, very hit or miss. And I think the biggest thing for me for PaperX that everybody needs to understand is that this team basically played a fake version of defensive macro for a year. And what I mean by that is, and this kind of goes to like all of these teams that have really, really, really heavily relied on Yoru over the last year, is that Yoru allowed you to have bad macro and still have good macro because you could instantly fix your rotations, right? And so you can see what PaperX is probably trying to do, which is that they're putting something who was their rotator on an agent that can rotate fast, right? He's playing the Neon like every map now, basically, and they want him to be that guy that is making the rotations. But I think that might be a mistake, and I think that might be a mistake because, in addition to the Yoru being like the macro fix for them, the Yoru allowed something to self-enable in a way that Neon doesn't. And what I mean by that is that he was always really good at being the guy that would be left on an island and he would be posted up with an op. And if he had the intuition that now I need to push for space or now I need to re-clear this space, he would flash, take it, and then if he was in danger, he would teleport out, or he would just flash and take it, and then he would continue to kind of like push, and he would find the information. But when he's on Neon, Neon is an agent that kind of needs support, and so you have to actually like change who he is in the team. It's not as simple as just like, oh, he's our rotator guy, because now you can't really leave him on an island because the Neon can't be like super aggressively pushed up all the time, and escape. And I think that sort of like that comfort level that something used to have playing, the Jet or the Yoru, who are both able to kind of like be super aggressive and take those chances, is somewhat missing from the Neon. And I think that is some of the main problems that they're having, is that their defensive macro is not nearly as good as it used to be because they were basically cheating on how they were playing the game by playing Yoru on like every map. And so it's not, I don't think that PaperX is bad, but I do think that they have like a pretty serious gap and pretty serious problem that they have to like work through and fix. Because if they're not going to play the Yoru and they're not going to play an agent that enables something to self-enable and kind of like be the solo guy a lot of the time, I think they kind of have to like recreate a lot of their identity. And some other fixes they could do, I mean, maybe something would be great on something like a chamber, even though that takes it away from Devi. You can maybe put Devi back on like the initiator type of role that he's played a lot of. I don't really know. They'll come up with their own solutions, but to me, just like from an outside perspective, that's kind of what it looks like to me, is that they've got like part of a functioning team, which is like Jing is doing well, Devi is doing well, Forsaken is doing his thing, Envy is solid, but then like this other whole half of their game, which was usually propped up by this Yoru character, is now missing, and they haven't really found the correct solution for it yet. So yeah, I mean, Gen G, honestly, the few changes that they made from week 1 to now, just bringing in Ashe, has been a big difference for them. I think that they will probably end up in the middle of the pack. I mean, it's maybe they can actually like do some real work here. I don't want to say like they're going to be a top level team, but some of the things that I was seeing from them were like really nice. And the more that they lean into texture being like this hard opper, I think the chamber is like so good, and having chamber or having texture be the second in, not having him be the main entry, is so good. So like throw Zinx to the wolves, let texture trade, let Karen trade. I think they're on the right track. So we'll kind of have to see. Honestly, we'll have to see how both of these teams develop over the next couple of weeks. Okay, let's move on to pick'ems. We've got some big games. Full Sense Feral, this will be easy. PaperX Secret, I mean, this should be easy. GE versus DRX. This is a big one. We finally get the Frost versus Termy. Will we get a fist bump? Will we get a handshake? Will they hug it out on stage? Probably not. I think this is really a coin flip. I'm going to go with DRX just because I feel like they they have like one better win. I think GE beat a Gen G, who obviously is now much better than they were, but they were terrible in week 1, and then they beat a team that they should beat in secret. So GE has not been tested yet. DRX beat Nongshim, and they withstood Team Secret. So they both have won over Secret, but I would definitely put Nongshim as better than bad Gen G. So I'm going to go with DRX, but this could go either way. Zeta versus DFM, this also could go either way. I'm going to go with Zeta just because I'm kind of more hopeful for them. There is a chance that DFM just outshoots them, because that is one thing that DFM does have a pretty good handle on, is their firepower. But I think that Zeta is just the better team, and so I'm going to go with Zeta. T1 versus RQ, I think this is a pretty big potential trap game for T1. I could definitely see RQ beat them. They've kind of had Munchkin's number in the past. I'm going to go with T1 because I'm not super high on RQ, but this is definitely a close game also. And then Nongshim versus Genji is super interesting because obviously Yeoman used to play for Genji. He's now coach for Nongshim. Nongshim kind of on the decline. Genji maybe on the rise. I mean, it's definitely scary. If Nongshim is still playing Breach on every map, I feel like Genji wins this. I think I'm just going to go Gen G. Just because even if Nongshim is switching off the Breach, I feel like they're going to have to reinvent themselves again, whereas Gen G gets to build 2 weeks in a row. I think I'm going to go Gen G, and it's unfortunate for Nongshim because I don't think Nongshim's bad, but I was fairly impressed with Gen G, and I think that it's going to be a close game. Those are my picks for week number 3. Let's kind of fairly quickly go through China. I know China's like the least popular of all the regions for me to talk about, but I do really enjoy watching it. I've been watching every single game, and just kind of quick top line stuff. Tai Lu loses to FPX. We'll go to week number 2. Tai Lu loses to FPX. This was pretty surprising to me. FPX had not been great, but really just like a god game from Ayong, a god series from Ayong, like top fragged, heavy on every single map, played unbelievable. Splash is insane. This Tai Lu team, for me, they're probably top 2 in China. I think they will go to London. I think people will really start to learn about this team. At least I hope so, because they're really exciting and fun to watch. They play hyper aggressive. They're so proactive. Very fun to watch. They absolutely destroyed. I think they might have the best bind in the world right now. The way that they play bind is insane. It's kind of like how PaperX used to play bind, but almost more aggressive. And they just destroyed FPX on bind. The next 2 maps very, very close. Again, just like hero moments from Ayong. Good calling. I think FPX is certainly on the rise as well. I would still rank Tai Lu maybe a little bit above them overall, but both these teams I think are good, and both these teams will probably make playoffs, and both of these teams have potential to make an event. So yeah, that's Tai Lu and FPX. Titan Esports against Bilibili. I mean, Bilibili Gaming, kind of inconsistent. TEC has played a lot of good teams close, and they finally got one out here. I think that they're a team. They're a little bit of like a gatekeeper team in China, even though they're probably going to end up kind of towards the bottom. They play a lot of teams very close, and they have some upset potential against everybody. I think BLG, if they're a bit off, they can be really off, and they got kind of caught out by TEC here. Some good anti stuff as well. Shilai against Nova. I mean, Nova's eliminated. I ended up not watching the last game that Nova and Wolves played because they both went 0-4. You know, Shilai takes care of business. Nova drops another game. It's just like this team is rebuilding. XLG is kind of doing their thing. EDG versus Trace. This one was kind of interesting. It's sort of been like, how good is EDG going to be? Because I thought that Trace was solid, but then EDG kind of destroyed them here. At least on map number 1, they looked insanely good. On Haven, they played a close game. Like, I think Trace is good, even though they switched off the Veto to play Viper now. Sad. I liked watching the Viper, but it is what it is. But EDG looks like they're in pretty good form right now. Kong is playing some of the best Valorant that I've seen him play in a while. I think he really is he's kind of like Texture in the same regard, where like now that somebody else can go in first and he can kind of be like the second guy, his stats are going to just go crazy. And so I think it's really good. It's really well set up for EDG's best players, which are Kong, Chichu, and Smoggy, to take over games, because GNE's kind of like the sacrificial guy. All Gamers beats JDG. All Gamers just a better team. JDG super talented, but kind of a mess right now. At least in this week, they were kind of a mess. We move on to DRG versus Wolves. Again, Wolves, they're fucked. Like they might be okay by stage 2, but they were not playing very well. DRG, they're also kind of like hit or miss, but they're gonna beat the bad teams most of the time. Trace versus Nova. I'm not even gonna go into these ones. BLG comes back and beats FPX, which is interesting. So FPX beats Tyloo. Tyloo beats BLG. BLG beats FPX. This one was like the good. BLG showed up. Neff played super well, called really well. Knight was clutch. And that's kind of like the biggest thing. And FPX kind of fell apart. I mean, 13-2 on Pearl. This was just an absolute obliteration. They could not stop them at all. Just like the Neon Phoenix just running at them. Zero answers to that. I think that FPX is a team that has, because they made quite a few changes, like bringing in Kovac and Benelli, Cetrad was already kind of a new player for them. So they've had so much turnover that they only have certain maps that they're good at right now, because they're still kind of building out their map pool. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing from FPX, is like, if they get their good maps, they can look really good. But if they get some maps that they haven't really spent a lot of time on, they can look really bad. And so I think they're kind of like a Veto dependent team. All Gamers against Tyloo was a very interesting one, because both these teams have been kind of on the rise over the last year. Tyloo, in this case, again, their bind, I'm telling you, their bind is fucking scary. Their bind is really, really good. Haven went the way of AG. I think this is like the only map where Tyloo is not playing double duelist, and I think it's probably a mistake. I really don't like it when teams are playing this Gen G comp when they don't really seem to understand how to play it very well. And I think this is a team that just wants to go fast. So all of a sudden having like a slow-paced map is not in their best interest. But we go back to Breeze. They're playing the Jet. They're playing like kind of standard stuff, but Splash is just an alien. Drops 25 and 9 plus 16. Just absolutely obliterated AG on this map. AG, as I mentioned in the previous video, they had subbed in their coach to be their IGL so that Kira could focus on fragging. They played a couple of games like that. They decided to pick up Yuze, who I think was on their academy team that they had then loaned to Any Question, and then they brought him back and have subbed him back in, and Kira is the IGL again. So this is a team that's kind of going through some stuff, and I think as a result, they are just kind of an inconsistent. They're a solid team, but they definitely have some problems. I would not be surprised if they kind of like fall off from where they were at stage 1. Last couple of games, JDG beats Titan Esports, and Shilai knocks out Wolves completely. This one was pretty interesting because JDG has now gone completely in a different direction. They have put Stu on full-time smokes after he's played Duelist for the last 2 years. They have put Jay, who played a ton of Neon and is insanely good at Neon in Ascension. They've put him as their primary Duelist. Yuka, who was the secondary duelist flex player for Wolves and also the Sentinel, has now been moved to secondary duelist slash flex player for JDG. Jay Kuro, who was playing Smokes, is now playing Sentinel, and Stu is playing Smokes. So it's been a giant reshuffle in 1 week, and they looked way better for it. So it's kind of an interesting approach. Maybe it will unlock them. They squeaked by TEC, who again played another pretty good team close, but this looked way more comfortable. Jay looked totally unlocked on the Neon. Stu looked much more comfortable on Smokes than he has playing the Duelist recently. And I think possibly what's going on here is that Stu is the only player who doesn't speak Chinese fluently, I believe, because he's Korean. And my guess would be that this team has struggled with coordinating the double duelist stuff. Like the Neon and the Waylay need to be in sync, right? They play off of each other. And I think that probably there was a bit of disconnect in how they were playing together. And so by putting Yuka on the guy that can dive in and make space for Jay. So they're basically using the Waylay as like the drone. The initiator goes in, Neon follows up. Stu doesn't have to do that communication that he might not have felt comfortable always being like the guy that was calling for the timing to go. And so now they have a player who I believe Yuka is their IGL. I could be wrong. It might be Coconut. It might be J. Kuro. I'm not sure. But I think it's Yuka. Anyway, he is now the guy that is being like, let's go. I'm going. Trade me. And then Stu kind of just gets to do his thing. Like he gets to anchor. He has really good aim, really good mechanics. The game is more simple for him playing Smokes. And it seemed to have worked out here. So just kind of an interesting little shift for that team. We look at the overall in the standings. You can see very, very close group over here in Group Alpha. And this one is basically over. And then we can go to Pick'ems. And we've got one set of games. Tyloo versus JDG. I'm going to go Tyloo. I think with the new JDG setup, this actually could be very explosive and very close. JDG has a lot to play for. So I'm kind of tempted to pick them here. But I'm going to back Tyloo just because I'm a big fan of how they play the game right now. Trace versus DRG. This is another very close game with huge implications as well. Because one of these teams is going to end up starting the lower bracket, one starting in the middle bracket for playoffs. I'm going to go with DRG, I think. Trace versus FPX, or sorry, Titan versus FPX. I think I'm going to go FPX. I think they're a little bit better, but I could definitely see Titan Esports beating them. AG versus BLG. Ooh, this is definitely an interesting one also. Man, a lot of these are very interesting matchups. And this one is also huge because the winner gets top seed. So for AG versus BLG, I think I'm going to go BLG. I just think that their firepower is a bit better than AG at the moment. I think even though they are kind of inconsistent, I think AG are as well. And I would take BLG over AG a little bit more often. Nova versus Wolves. I think Wolves wins this. I think they've showed a bit more rapid improvement than Nova, but both teams are in a rough spot. And then EDG versus XLG will be super interesting because XLG seems like probably the best team, but the way that EDG is playing right now has been pretty impressive. I think I'm going to go XLG just because I think EDG, I think their group has been a little bit easier. I mean, they're in the same group, but I think I'm not sold on EDG yet. I'm not sold on them yet. But they definitely could beat XLG. I'm going to go XLG just because I'm a little bit higher on them right now. We'll save that. Quick look at the meta in China. Tons of Neon Waylay. Where are the Sentinels? Nowhere to be seen. No Vice being played. No Deadlock. No Sage. Basically no Veto. Basically no Chamber. All we do in China is go fast. So definitely, if you want to watch chaos, watch China. What about EMEA Pacific and Americas? It's going to be fairly similar, but with some different nuances. Tons of Neon again as well for EMEA. A lot more Viper Astra. And actually, no other duelist until 27%, which is way less. So very interesting. Lots of solo Neon being played. A lot more Chamber. Interestingly, still not really any Vice being played. Not much Veto either. This meta is very, very like double smoke, single initiator based. Lots of Sky, lots of Fade. In Pacific, we're gonna have a lot of double duelists again. But a bit more spread, a lot more sort of creativity and being taken by the teams. We got Chamber, we got Teo, we got Breach, got some Raze, some Cypher. Not much Vice still, not much Veto. A little bit of Deadlock here as well. Full Sense is playing some Deadlock, which is kind of cool. But yeah, Neon just dominating across the board. In Americas, same thing, 73%. A lot of Sova being played alongside. In my opinion, I think the Sova is the best pairing with the Neon, just because you can break the trips. The dart gets there in time, whereas Fade Eye can be slow. Sky Flashes can be kind of awkward with the Neon. So kind of an interesting little change here of a lot more Sova being played than any other region. A lot more Vice as well. Chamber in there. Basically no Cypher, Sage, Deadlock, anything like that. A lot more Harbor also being played. It's another thing that I think people are trying to play to kind of counter the Neon dive. So some interesting kind of meta differences. And I think that we're still kind of at a place where we're going to see a ton of Neon and we're going to see a lot of bad Neon. And once the stage is over, I will pull the stats just to kind of like see how actually impactful was the Neon. It just gets talked about all the time. It is obviously a very strong agent for a lot of different reasons. But I still don't believe it's like the only thing you should be doing. And so it will just be interesting to see who actually comes out on top over the course of stage number one. One last thing that I do want to talk about is just the 2027 roadmap. A lot of other people have covered it, so I'm only going to spend like a minute on it here. I'm very happy that there's a lot more opportunities for open quals. I think that system is always good. The leagues were cool just because they gave you like a set sort of, you get to prep and then you get to play and then you get to prep and then you get to play. But there's also been so much sort of mixing up the leagues as well, where like, China's playing 4 weeks before Americas plays 1, and some leagues are finishing early, so they get extra time to prep for the internationals. So there's been a lot of problems, and also just like the league system of like, oh, you lose two games in a hard group and your season is done for like the next 2.5 months. All of that was kind of shit. There were definitely pros and cons. I think 2027 it's going to be very chaotic in the off season. I do have a ton of concerns with regards to the fact that a lot of it's going to be played online. So we're going to have a lot of problems with ping and stuff like that. I think we'll probably see another like mass migration of teams, potentially, at least in like Americas, moving to Texas again, like we had before franchising started. We're going to see several teams get kicked out of the league because I think they're going to shrink the number of partner teams. So we're going to have more sort of teams that are fighting for scraps, and the teams that are like, the partner teams. I really do think it's going to be kind of like PUBG, where you've got like these teams that have the extra support of like the in-game bundles and stuff like that, and then you have everybody else that's kind of like scrapping for a chance to get that. I do like that the partnership is being renewed on a 2-year basis now, because it's going to allow Riot more flexibility to kind of like reevaluate teams. But also, I have a lot of like logistical concerns, I think, just because I guess one thing that'll be really good is the lack of necessity for teams to all like move to a central place now. I think that will be really good, and probably it's going to help with some of like the cost prohibitivity, whatever the word is. I think one thing that's been really like cost prohibitive for some teams is they qualify for Ascension and then they have to like move to an expensive city, set up an operation for 1 year. Or we saw this a lot with teams when the leagues first started, is like all of a sudden you have to move your entire operation that might be based in, some country with a fan base. Now you're moving to Berlin or you're moving to Seoul. You have no sort of like real background there. You have to kind of like start a new company. It costs so much money to do that. I think it'll be a lot less intense for teams to get set up in the leagues now, because obviously there are no leagues. So basically, like, you qualify, you're playing online. They'll bring you to the host city, which is still gonna probably be like Seoul and LA and stuff, at least for now. And then they'll put you up for the tournament, and then you go back home. And so I think we'll see a little bit more of like a spreading out of where teams are based. You know, the Japanese teams don't have to live in Korea, which they've been complaining about. They can just live in Japan and then go to Korea for the tournament if they qualify. But yeah, we'll definitely have some issues with paying. We'll definitely have issues with visa, which is always just an unfortunate nature of these things. Like, we'll have to be a little bit more selective with where these international tournaments are held. Just because, especially with like the state of the world, there's gonna be a lot of visa issues, I think, for the near future. So very excited for like the openness of the circuit, but also there will definitely be some drawbacks. Yeah, it'll just be really interesting, and the off season is going to be insane. All these teams are going to get shuffled. All the coaching staffs are going to get shuffled. Like, people are going to be losing their jobs, getting a job. There's going to be a lot of gambles. We're probably going to have a very similar thing that happened at the beginning of franchise, which is that there's going to be some really bad teams that get formed on some big orgs. There's going to be some really good teams that get formed on some small orgs. There's going to be a lot of shuffling going on, and it's going to be exciting and chaotic and cool. So thank you for watching. As always, leave me comments below. I will try to answer them in the next video. This has been very long. There's been a lot to cover. I appreciate you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.